This episode of CppCast is sponsored by Backtrace, the turnkey debugging platform that helps you spend less time debugging and more time building. Get to the root cause quickly with detailed information at your fingertips. Start your free trial at backtrace.io/CppCast. And by JetBrains, maker of intelligent development tools to simplify your challenging tasks and automate the routine ones. JetBrains is offering a 25% discount for an individual license on a C++ tool of your choice. CLion, ReSharper C++, or AppCode. Use the coupon code JetBrains for CppCast during checkout at jetbrains.com. Episode 121 of CppCast with guest Matt Bentley, recorded October 4th, 2017. In this episode, we discuss trip reports and recorded sessions from CppCon 2017. Then we talk to Matt Bentley. Matt talks to us about making a better linked list and shares some updates from SG14. Welcome to episode 121 of CppCast, the only podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, welcome back from CppCon.
Hey, thanks, Rob. It's a good trip. Good conference. Everyone should go.
Absolutely. I hope I can make it there next year. I'm really sad I had to miss it this year. And you're going to be going to even more conferences soon, right?
Yeah, I'll be going to Pacific++ and meeting C++.
Okay, so just a minor programming note, because Jason's going to be away at these conferences, we might be pre-recording some episodes. We might miss a week or two here and there. I might try to bring on kind of a guest co-host with me while he's out at those conferences. But well, that's somewhat up in the air right now, but just be ready that some of our scheduled might be a little hectic over the next few weeks. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, top of our episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week, Jason, we got these tweets from Hoodie D, and he was commenting on how he just found a new Rust language podcast, and then mentioned how he had just been listening to us on CppCast without realizing that this Rust language podcast is hosted by your cousin.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
And, it's people might just think it's some weird coincidence that two different Turners host podcast for languages. But yes, I am related to John.
Yeah. And he's been like a Rust advocate for a while now, and I guess he just started the podcast recently because it looks like it was just the second episode.
Yep, episode number 2 aired today.
Pretty cool. Okay, well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the show. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com, and don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Joining us again today is Matt Bentley. Matt was born in Hey, Matt. Matt was born in 1978 and never recovered from the experience. He started programming in 1986, completing a bachelor's in computer science in 1999, before spending 3 years working for a legal publishing firm, getting chronic fatigue syndrome, quitting, building a music studio, recovering, getting interested in programming again, building a game engine, and stumbling across some generalized solutions to some old problems. Matt, welcome to the show.
G'day. How you going?
Doing great.
Matt, I think in another bio of yours that I saw, you comment that your keyboard also doubles as a self-defense weapon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the IBM Model M, that's fantastic. It's got this huge metal plate in the back of it, which means that it actually has like a lot of weight, and the plastic is not like the soft kind of plastic that they use for keyboards nowadays. And I think they've actually done a test, like somebody's done a test online with like a hardish watermelon, which is meant to be I don't know how accurate this is, meant to be about the density of a human skull or thereabouts. Okay. You're actually able to smash a watermelon with one of these things, like smash it in half. So, if I ever come across a burglar and they happen to have a skull with the approximate density of a watermelon, then I'm totally saved.
Nice.
plus the extension cord on it is really super long, so you could probably like defend yourself without having to unplug it from the computer. So
well, that's
bonus as well.
Definitely handy. That would have been one of my biggest concerns, actually.
Absolutely.
Whether or not I would tear the cord out or something. Did you see that they're actually...
You don't want to damage the keyboard while you're defending yourself. I mean, that's
right.
priorities.
Definitely. Did you see that a Kickstarter or something, I think, is actually recreating the Model M?
No, but it doesn't surprise me. I think there's been several sort of Model M-esque keyboards that have come out from various manufacturers to meet that need. So, but that sounds like they're going a bit further, I guess.
Yeah, this guy's trying to recreate using the original patents for the switches and going back and using the exact right metal and getting the right texture and lots of traveling back and forth to Asia to get it all sorted out.
Wow.
I don't remember where it last left off. I saw a couple weeks ago.
That's crazy. I actually fixed my one recently. Basically, the spacebar stopped working properly, and eventually I discovered that I had to take the entire thing apart and do what's called a bolt mod, which takes several days, and do all of that and order in about $50 worth of bolts and nuts and this sort of thing, just to get it apart and be able to put it back together again to fix this one thing. It's absolutely insane, but luckily I had a spare Model M that I'd found lying in a gutter somewhere at some point that I was able to grab some parts out of, because people are heathens. They just throw out this stuff like it's not gold. So
terrible.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, what are we coming to? That's it.
Right.
But
okay, well, we got a couple news articles to discuss, Matt, and then we'll start talking to you more about your upcoming talk at Pacific Plus Plus and some other things. Okay.
Sweet.
Okay, so this first article is from former guest of the show, Kenny Kerr, who wrote an article on MSDN Magazine, C++ from Algorithms to Coroutines, and it seems like it's a really good introduction to coroutines. It's a very long article. I'll admit I didn't get through the whole thing, but looks like it's a really great intro to coroutines and writing your own generators. Yeah.
Well, and I would say, if you cheat and skip to the bottom, to the very last example, you kind of go, oh. Although you do have to, it does rely on stuff from many pages before that.
You want to spoil it for us?
No. No, okay. It's you definitely have to see all the pieces, but the very bottom of it is making a limitless generator, which I thought was an interesting idea. It's all about making generators, so it's all about making something that's easier to use than IOTA, basically.
Nice. Okay. And then the next article we have, and I'm sure we're going to see a whole bunch of these, but this is a CppCon 2017 trip report. But this one has a bit of a different perspective. It's a beginner's guide to CppCon 2017, and it's from this programmer who wasn't originally planning to actually go to the conference, but heard about the free lightning talks and the last day of the conference, which was free, and decided to attend that and was just really happy about how the talk went. And this was a female programmer, and talked about how CppCon was a very welcoming environment for her.
I'm glad she had a great experience with it.
Yeah, did you meet her at the conference, Jason?
I did.
I see it mentioned that she went out to dinner with a bunch of speakers. I thought maybe you had met her.
Oh, yeah, I went out to, the last dinner on Friday night, yes, we were both there, but she was on the opposite end of a table with 14 people there. Oh. But I did get the chance to chat with her a little bit before that and earlier in the week.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm glad to hear that someone so new to CppCon and who's kind of a self-described beginner at C++ is able to have, find so much great content out of the conference. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
And then next thing, also CppCon 2017 related, they're starting to upload more and more videos from CppCon 2017. So far, it looks like they have all 5 of the keynotes or plenaries. Yes. And looks like about 6 more talks from day one, I'm guessing?
Yeah, up to 12 now. Yeah.
12 talks total, yeah. So yeah, I have a lot to watch. I've so far only watched 2 of the keynotes, but I need to try to catch up with this as quickly as I can.
Yeah. I'm kind of bummed that I missed the whole thing, but yeah, again, I'm trying to catch up with them. I watched Biane's one, about to get on to Titus Winter's one, but, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the time they're all up, you'll only have about 100 hours of video to watch.
Only, yeah, I know.
Yeah, so far I've only watched Titus's and Bjarne's talk as well. Jason, any particular ones you think we should be watching as soon as possible?
I mean...
Your one, obviously.
Well, I gave 2. You can watch them if you want to. I was just in the middle of watching Patrice's. It was one of the ones that I missed and really wanted to watch. Well, actually, I think he gave 2, but his is up. One of his is up right now, episode 8. Patrice, which machine am I coding to?
Model.
Yeah.
That looked interesting. I watched a couple of minutes of that as well. But yeah, it again didn't have time to get all the way through it, but I want to.
And Matt's end note, as they called it, was very good also.
Okay, I'll have to watch that one soon. Okay, well, Matt, as we mentioned, you're going to be speaking at the very first Pacific++ conference in October. Can you give us a little preview as to what your talk's going to be about?
Yeah, so basically, I'll go back a little bit. Sometime like late last year, somebody got in touch with me. I should probably find out their name, since I will be mentioning it during my speech as well. But basically, last time I was on here, I was talking about Colony, which is my other container, the unordered one. And he was using, or trying to use Colony to kind of build a vaguely contiguous linked list. So because Colony is all segmented, rather than individual allocations, he figured that would be a better way to go to make a linked list that performed better. And I thought, it's not a bad idea. It's quite an inefficient way of doing it, though. So I started thinking about that and thought about it for about 3 months. And after which time I'd kind of come up with, in my head, what would probably be the most performant way of building some kind of contiguous linked list. So when we're not individually allocating and deallocating every single element. And I succeeded eventually. Took 6 months to do it properly, because there's a lot of ground to cover in linked list. There's a lot of built-in functions, the splicing and the merging and stuff. So basically I'm going to be talking about that and where linked lists are actually useful, because there's been a lot said about how bad linked lists are in general, and for the most part that's true, but there's a lot of areas where they're actually quite useful, and some areas where they're actually the best performing out of all the standard containers in given scenarios, and that actually includes standard list. But the point of PLF list is basically to improve on the generalized performance of standard list and try and get it so that we're sort of expanding the potential use cases for it. So that's it in a nutshell anyway.
So it sounds like this list fully implements the standard list interface, and you could see it as a drop-in replacement for standard list?
Yeah. One exception, it doesn't do partial splices, so you can fully splice one list into another list at any given point in the list. What you can't do is splice part of one list into another list, and the reason for that is basically because if you've got multiple memory blocks and you've got some of the elements that you want to splice are in one memory block and some of them are in another, you can't have two linked lists both owning these memory blocks. and you need to be able to transfer these elements without invalidating pointers. So basically the only way you can do a proper splice in this context, if you've got a contiguous backend, is to transfer all of the memory blocks from one list into the other one. And you can't do that if you're only splicing some of the elements. It has to be all of them. But other than that, yeah, it covers everything that's in standard list, merging and sorting and blah-de-blah.
So why the interest in revisiting linked lists? Seems like the community has really rallied around the idea of just using vector for almost everything these days.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what facet of the community you talk to.
Sure.
Like, I mean, obviously, if you talk to Mike Acton, you'll get a very different answer about that. But, in games development in general, yes, there is a place for vectors, but it's not generally a huge place.
Okay.
And a lot of, not all, but a lot of the high-performance fields are similar. Having said that, not many of the high-performance fields are going to be using linked lists, but they might be using things like intrusive lists. But that's kind of a different use case entirely. Main reason for revisiting it was kind of because it was there. Like, I saw that this was the way it was and it could be improved, so I decided to do it. And in doing so, like, I have expanded the use cases. I found a way of sorting for linked lists or for any bidirectional iterator container that's a lot faster, like 81% faster than standard list sorting. Because one of the kind of misconceptions around linked lists is, probably not amongst too many people nowadays, but a lot of people think, oh, they must be good for sorting because all you have to do is rearrange the pointers rather than reallocating the elements, but it doesn't actually work out that way. So I found a way of hacking around it so that we can essentially internally use standard sort or some other kind of quick sort algorithm with a linked list or any bidirectional container and get significant speed up in performance. Yeah, but I mean there are some use cases which I'll go into in my speech in a bit more detail. But basically, if you've got an ordered scenario, so you've got a scenario where you've got a lot of data and you're doing a lot of ordered insertion and a lot of ordered erasure, once you get beyond a certain threshold of modification to iteration, so essentially once you're getting, if you're inserting and erasing about 1% of your elements for every iteration that you do, or more than that, then at that point, because the insertion and erasure characteristics of list are so good, that ends up being the fastest container for that scenario. There's a few other places where they're quite useful as well, basically because all of the operations don't reallocate. So you merge, you splice, you insert stuff, you remove stuff, and nothing invalidates your pointers. So if you've got a highly modular or object-oriented system that you're working with and you're doing a lot of ordered work, then you can save a lot of time by using a linked list of some sort, because you can just point directly at things rather than using a vector and then having to update indexes or find a workaround for it and this sort of thing. And I have... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say, I have gone into, like in my benchmarks and stuff, I have gone into some of the workarounds for vector and deck, such as like using a vector of indexes that points to a vector of elements, and then you update the vector of indexes and you don't invalidate your indexes and the vector of elements and this sort of thing. So I have explored some of those workarounds. I can't say I've explored all of them because there's got to be a whole bunch of them that I haven't thought of. But anyway.
I was curious if you've noticed any difference in how the container performs because I'm thinking about the cost of moving and copying objects around, like you were saying. So it seems like the size of the object and whether or not it is trivially copyable or trivially movable would have some bearing on vector versus your list versus regular list performance.
Sure. So your question is essentially right. Yeah. So whether in those sort of highly ordered high modification scenarios, whether or not basically changing the type from a smaller type to a larger type,
or something that's not trivially copyable,
Yeah, certainly that will make a difference, probably in lists' favor more than anything. I've been testing with just straight, either scalar types or small structs where there's, it's trivially copyable and that sort of thing. So in that context, you would think that vector would have more of an advantage because if it's trivially copyable, then there's less to do when it reallocates. But yeah, testing, at least my testing shows that that's not the case. I have had some third-party benchmarks come back to me from one developer that showed some different results for PLF list, but some of it was, I don't want to say flaky, but some of it seemed quite inconsistent, and the guy didn't get back to me about, what compiler he was using, how he was doing this stuff, so I haven't had a chance to process that as yet, but at least in terms of the stuff, the benchmarks that I've been running so far, it's pretty positive.
So you may have just answered a question I had. Did you already open source your linked list as part of your PLF library?
Yeah, it's all open source.
Do you have any plans to try to get that into the standard as part of the SG14 proposals?
I have had a thought around that. I mean, basically, it certainly wouldn't go in as, a proposal for a different kind of container. The only proposal that would go ahead would be like a proposal to make partial splicing optional for standard list, because that's the only thing you need to change in order to make something like PLF list be a viable standard list implementation. But of course the problem with that is you run into the possibility of breaking old code, and it comes down to people measuring up whether the performance advantage is worth, breaking this small thing, given that people aren't using linked lists much anymore because of the performance problems. So I don't know. I'm kind of undecided about that, whether I should even bother, because I don't know if you have put through a proposal at some point, you'll know that it's quite a wearying process of back and forward and getting feedback and trying to figure out what it means and whether people actually understood what you were saying, or all this sort of jazz. So
right.
Yeah, I might talk to SG14 about that and see whether they think it's a good idea to put forward. Because the advantages, as far as I can benchmark so far, and again, probably want to have some third-party results come back before I go too far with it, but at least under my benchmarks, in terms of single insertion, it's about 333% faster than standard list, and that's simply because you're allocating in chunks rather than individually. Erasure is about 81% faster, and iteration is about 16% faster, and that's just because you've got a bit more memory contiguousness. It doesn't have as much of an effect as you would think it would. I mean, that's simply because you're just following pointers all the time, which gets in the way of prefetching and a lot of other stuff.
Right. So I have a question that's maybe a tad, I'm ignorant on the exact issues, but I know that when we talk to people about game development, they talk about things like memory fragmentation And I'm imagining like your list being allocated in chunks because you want that cache friendliness and the contiguousness.
Yeah.
And then if you have to insert something in the middle of one of these chunks, do you end up with like your objects being now fragmented throughout your chunks, I guess?
Right. What you're saying is, I think what you're saying is, do you end up with a non-linear progression through memory as you're following the next pointers?
It seems like you would have to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you do.
Okay.
So part of the design of PLF list is, you can't mitigate for that because you can't break up these memory. If you've allocated these memory chunks and you filled them up with elements, you can't, then go and insert into the middle of that and then reallocate everything, because one of the properties that we like about linked lists is that the pointers stay valid. So you can't have any reallocation of elements. So what you end up having to do is, if everything's full up, you just insert to the back and then you link to that. So in that case, you do end up with sort of a bit more of a stride happening in terms of your memory accesses. But the way that I've tried to mitigate for that is by basically trying to find the optimal solution for refilling erased nodes. So, you erase an element and then that node becomes available for reuse. So part of all the work that I did around PLF list was actually spending like about 2 months trying to find the optimal way from any given insertion position to find the nearest free erased node. And if you do that, then assuming you're doing a certain amount of erasure and you're doing a certain amount of insertion, then you can end up with your strides between the different elements being much lower. And yeah, tried a whole bunch of different methods and basically did it all by benchmarking, and the end result is something that I'm pretty happy with. Probably beyond the scope of our talk to go into too much detail on it, but basically it ends up having per memory chunk free lists for the erased nodes, and then a whole heap of other garbage on top of that. Lots of fun. Yeah.
It sounds a lot like the kinds of algorithms that you had to come up with to decide where to fill in the next free chunk. It sounds a lot like you implemented basically an in-memory file system in a way. Like looking for the next free node, figuring out where the next chunk of data should go, linking things together like that.
I haven't really worked file systems in a great way, so I can't really answer that with any clarity, but probably. Hopefully so. Yeah.
I wanted to interrupt this discussion for just a moment to bring you a word from our sponsors. Backtrace is a debugging platform that improves software quality, reliability, and support by bringing deep introspection and automation throughout the software error lifecycle. Spend less time debugging and reduce your mean time to resolution by using the first and only platform to combine symbolic debugging, error aggregation, and state analysis. At the time of error, Backtrace jumps into action, capturing detailed dumps of application and environmental state. Backtrace then performs automated analysis on process memory and executable code to classify errors and highlight important signals such as heap corruption, malware, and much more. This data is aggregated and archived in a centralized object store, providing your team a single system to investigate errors across your environments. Join industry leaders like Fastly, Message Systems, and AppNexus that use Backtrace to modernize their debugging infrastructure. It's free to try, minutes to set up, fully featured with no commitment necessary. Check them out at backtrace.io/CppCast. So when we first had you on about 60 episodes ago, we talked about SG14, which is the game development high performance work group, and also a container proposal you worked on, the PLF colony. Have there been any progress or big updates with your proposals?
Yeah, I mean the container itself has progressed quite a bit. It now supports splicing as well and has a proper sort algorithm now. It's gone through quite a few revisions. I think the biggest problem with it is partially the name, because people just seem to get hung up on that. I don't really know why, and that's probably because I'm too close to it to really see the wood for the trees. But yeah, people kind of look at the name and for some reason kind of go, oh, that's weird. I don't understand that. And then they try and describe the whole thing in terms of other containers, and it doesn't really work out because it's not similar enough to other containers to call them different names, and kind of goes on and on. But yeah, I've had some good feedback, and there's been a lot of revisions based on that. I do find it a bit wearying because people ask for stuff and then you put more stuff in, and then it goes for the next round of feedback and people get confused because there's too much stuff, but there's not the stuff that they specifically want, and then they ask for that, and so you end up putting that earlier in the document, and it just, it's a bit of a ridiculous process, but I think the biggest problem is that the container itself is fairly complex and not easily described in a couple of sentences. So, yeah, we'll see how things go.
Any other news updates relating to SG14?
Not in a huge way, more just sort of things ticking along and some proposals popping up and other ones sort of dying out a bit. I know that there is ongoing feedback for some of the other ideas that are coming through. Unfortunately, because of the time frame, the monthly kind of online talks for SG14 are all at 4 o'clock in the morning my time, which means, and I'm not really copacetic at that point, so I haven't really grabbed one as yet, but I mean to do so this month if I can. There was talk of like building an SG14 library at one point. An idea I kind of poo-pooed that idea. I wasn't so keen on it because I think it distributes the focus of the group too much, and you get a lot of kind of noise coming out from that sort of thing. But I understand where people were coming from, and it's something that may happen at some point. I think part of it comes out of frustration from people, kind of putting these proposals forward and not seeing much progress and wanting to get them out there in some way, shape and form, which is, I think that's a good thing. So it might happen at some point.
Sounds like an interesting scenario if there was a semi-official library that came out of one of the study groups from the C++ Standards Committee that people would take it seriously, like it's part of the standardization, and maybe that's not necessarily what you want up front, or maybe it is what you want. I assume there's some...
It's a little bit confusing at that point, yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea, honestly, but it seems like it would have the potential to. I was just imagining maybe that's some of the discussion that you all have had within the group.
Yeah, I think there definitely wasn't an idea to make it more like an official thing. I think it would have been more like EA's standard template implementation sort of thing, where it's just something that people can use if they want to, and people know that it has a particular focus, which in this case is around performance specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next standards meeting, I think, is going to be in Albuquerque in a month. You have any plans to try to make it to that?
No. I mean, I'm very much going to be caught up with Pacific C++, and then after that I'm just going to crash and burn for a while, because kind of been going hard on PLF lists since the beginning of the year, and initially I wasn't sure if it could actually be done well, or if I could do it well, but I managed to do it well. I'm really happy about that, and once the conference is over, it'll be a good opportunity to just kind of take a rest from that. But maybe next year I might be able to make it through to one of these things. Patrice Roy and I've forgotten his name off the top of my head, and that's a really bad thing.
Guy Davidson?
There's Sean...
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
Yeah, there's Guy Davidson and also Sean...
Middleditch?
Yeah,
Okay.
all of them have at various points offered to help out with presenting the proposal at the various places, so I've been quite grateful for that. Yeah, but it is problematic not being there to actually be able to explain stuff to people, given that some of the knowledge is kind of fairly, deep into it as to why this, that, and the other. So I think it is suffering a little because of that. So if I have the opportunity to do so, I'll definitely do that.
So it sounds like, though, from the way you're talking, that this SG14 meetings don't happen like with the C++ standards meetings. You said there's like an online thing that happens, and I know they just had an SG14 meeting at CppCon.
Yeah. That pretty much seems to be the way it works. There's an online kind of group, phone call / chat, etc. That happens every month. I'm not actually that familiar myself with how the other standards groups kind of work things out. So
okay.
Yeah.
So do you, what is, in your opinion, is the next major thing that SG14 really needs to tackle to be able to get pushed into the committee to address the needs of the game programming and high-performance community?
I'd really like to see some progress on some kind of flat map. There's been multiple proposals for that, one from Sean Middleditch and at least two others, and I can't even remember whether one of those is inside or outside SG14 or whatever, but it seems like that's definitely a big thing that needs to happen, like basically a map whose performance isn't bad for the majority of cases that we're using them for. And there really needs to be some kind of consolidation there in terms of looking at the various different proposals and kind of, I guess, people coming together and settling on, what is the best way to do it. And I don't know if that's really happening at the moment, but, there's the potential there for that to just kind of die off due to there being too much diversification in terms of needs, but I guess that's always the case in terms of proposals. There's always some people who need something different, particularly when it comes to containers. At this point, I should note that I'm not even necessarily in favor of standardizing everything. Last time I talked on CPP chat with John Kalb, I think he was talking about how I think it was in Go, they basically have the core language and then they just have lots of different libraries. And, there's not so much of this attempt to standardize everything. And in a way, I feel that could be more healthy. Because by the time you've gotten something standardized, it takes such a long time, and then it takes even longer for it to come into the language.
Sure.
To actually get implemented in compilers. And by that time, you can have 5 to 10 years have passed, and the CPUs are all different, and the way that we're doing stuff is different. And, it's a bit ridiculous. And I've seen it happen with Colony to an extent. Initially, when I was programming it, I was doing it all on a Core 2, so a lot of my assumptions were based on that processor, its performance, this sort of thing. But more recently, I finally got the paper for the jump counting skip field pattern, which is kind of one of the core components. Got that paper published, relatively small journal, I think under Springer, and More recently, I've been trying to get the full paper published because there's quite a bit more. I had to truncate it a bit. Anyway, what I ended up doing for the full paper was including the benchmarks for both Core 2 processors and Haswell. And I was amazed at how much of a difference there was in terms of the characteristics. Like, Core 2 has a really small branch decision history table, so Boolean skip fields work really poorly on it, like really, really poorly. So jump counting skip field always has a iteration advantage. But when you go onto Haswell, it's got, I'm not sure of the exact number, but from the benchmarks it looks like a branch decision history table that can store about 2,500 branch decisions.
Wow.
So until you get up to beyond 2,500 elements in your container, the Boolean skip field works just as well as a jump counting skip field. And then after that point, then you get the performance advantage from, a jump counting skip field. So things can change so much in 10 years, which is why I'm quite, I'm not necessarily in with that crowd sort of thing, but I have a lot of sympathy for kind of the people who are talking about more data-driven design and this sort of thing, because it's really hard to generalize, and it's even hard to generalize within the scope of 10 years. So if we're standardizing stuff now, or trying to standardize it, we've already seen what's happened with linked lists albeit over the course of like 20 years or so. But, what are things going to be like in 10 years? We don't specifically know. That's the problem.
Right.
End rant.
So if you're not necessarily trying to get some of your containers to become part of the standard, what do you think are some of the major things that SG14 is working on that they are trying to get into the standard?
Sorry, I missed that. So,
but you're saying you're not necessarily trying to get like colony or PLF list into the standard. I'm just wondering, what do you see SG14's goals as with standardization?
Yeah, I mean those are the goals, and those are my goals at present. I guess I'm just pointing out the problematic aspects of standardizing everything. I think it's good to have that stuff in there if you can,
right.
But it's just that the process of standardization leaves things fairly inflexible to change long term. So there are a lot of things that people use on a very frequent basis, like what's the one that Guy Davidson is working on? Trying to get it into my head, like a loop, elements. Feeling really dumb at the moment. Didn't have a lot of sleep last night.
Oh, a ring
buffer?
Yes, a ring.
Yeah.
Man, where am I working?
Yes, we talked to Guy about that, I think, even, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, that's something that people in embedded use as well. So it's sort of one of these oversights as to why isn't this in there when there's these other things that are, not actually used as much in there. So it does make sense to have stuff in there, and if you can. But I'm also sort of in favour of saying, well, maybe not everything needs to be standardized. Maybe we can actually say, let's do things this way, and somehow provide a more flexible way for people to be able to get libraries and use them without some of the difficulties that come with that. And I think that's, as far as I understand it, that's part of what modules is trying to address. That be your understanding?
I can say I am definitely not an expert in modules.
Maybe we'll leave that then. Yeah. Cool.
Well, anything else you're looking forward to with the upcoming Pacific++ conference?
Yeah, Akaroa. Akaroa is a little French town, was French, out on the peninsula, about a few hours' drive from Christchurch. It's the only place in New Zealand that was colonized by the French.
Oh.
And the English had to work really hard to make sure that that the French didn't actually claim it for their country, so they found out in advance, but by only a small amount, that the French were planning to land there and put their flag down there, and so they raced ahead and got there in a few days, and I think they got there maybe only a day before the French arrived and put the English flag in there. But it's this beautiful, quaint little French town, kind of situated in between big mountains and next to the sea and all this sort of thing. And there's whale watching, that sort of thing. So that's going to be pretty cool. I haven't been there for about 10 years. Quite looking forward to that.
And that's where the conference is being held?
No,
okay.
Not at all. That's just where I'm going after to crash and burn. But no, I'm looking forward to the conference itself, obviously. It'll be... And Christchurch is a lovely town. Earthquakes aside, it's a lovely town. It's been quite a while since we've had an earthquake there, so I think you're fine. If you're worrying about it, don't worry about it.
I have not been worried about it.
Sweet, but yeah, it's just a lovely place to be in general, and yeah, it'll just be good to kind of see yourself and see all the other people who are more in depth in the C++ community and kind of hang out a bit more. It's fairly auspicious in a sense, being the first kind of Australasian C++ conference. So I kind of hope it goes well, for Phil's sake. He's the guy who's organising the whole thing. Because, he's really put his own butt on the line there in terms of doing the funding side of it and all that sort of thing. So if it does well, then hopefully next time we can get more sponsorship and do a bigger event and that sort of thing. It'd be good.
Yeah, and I'm definitely really looking forward to the opportunity to meet people that I've only chatted with online, both there and at Meeting C++. And of course, New Zealand is legendary for its beauty, so looking forward to that too.
Yeah, I think you were saying you've got a week before or afterwards to do some sightseeing.
We'll be doing some touring around the island, so should be able to see a good bit of it, I think.
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, you kind of need a decent month for the South Island to really go everywhere, but yeah, I mean, regardless, whatever amount of time you have, you'll enjoy it, so it's a good plan.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on again today, Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for listening in as we chat about C++. I'd love to hear what you think of the podcast. Please let me know if we're discussing the stuff you're interested in. Or if you have a suggestion for a topic, I'd love to hear about that too. You can email all your thoughts to feedback@cppcast.com. I'd also appreciate if you like CppCast on Facebook and follow CppCast on Twitter. You can also follow me at Rob W. Irving and Jason at LeftKiss on Twitter. And of course, you can find all that info and the show notes on the podcast website at cppcast.com. Theme music for this episode is provided by podcastthemes.com.